Good evening, bienvenidos y chaumanguicap. Thank you for joining us this evening to learn about our district's fiscal year 13 budget. We have, as she said, two big presentations tonight, one about the budget, one about the bond. Both are really critical to get your feedback on as we start planning for the next school year. And some of the decisions we'll be making will have implications for many years to come. So don't be shy. Make sure that after you hear the presentation, you take the opportunity to ask us any questions you may have. Now, our budget issues are kind of at the heart of some of the challenges that we're having as a community today. We have been, for the past few years, working on a lot of austerity planning, finding ways to reduce the budget, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But what I think is most important for people to understand is that our district has changed significantly over the last 10 or so years. We are now more diverse than ever, and our diversity is something that we embrace and we know is going to make us stronger as a district. But in embracing that diversity, it means that there are some facts about our district that some people don't really know a lot about. First, over the last 10 years, we've grown to be over 86,000 kids. We have over 90 languages spoken in AISD. A quarter of our students are English language learners. 2 out of 3 kids are poor. We have more than 30% of our students moving back and forth to different schools in our district. They're considered mobile, which makes it kind of hard to track students in their academic performance. But that's a big piece of what is a challenge for us as people change their residences in a city where housing is very expensive. 1 in 10 of our students are special education students, and over 30,000 students now are considered and participate in advanced academics. That's almost a third of our students, and that is a great thing for AISD. But in order to serve this population, it means that we have to really think about our resources and where those resources go. For those of you who've been following the work of what's been happening in Austin, one of the things that was a very harsh reality for school districts all across the state is that our budgets were cut by the legislature by over $4 billion, topping about $5 billion. And as a result of that, our portion in the Austin Independent School District was a permanent reduction of $60 million, which is almost 10% of what's left of us to be able to use for operational purposes and spend on our school districts, schools. So since I began as the superintendent in 2009, we immediately had to start planning for budget reductions. By the time we got to our second and third year, we were making cuts all across the district, upwards of $30 million. And then after the legislative session of that $60 million permanent cut from AISD, we really started feeling it in our classrooms and schools. This is where we had to eliminate over 1,000 positions across the district, and all of our school buildings were starting to be affected by these deep cuts in the state. Now, we still have a very serious shortfall. It's upwards of $40 million. That's part of what happened with the state. And as we look to the future, we're going to have to be very smart and very deliberate about how we're going to manage those reductions. We will have a need for a permanent funding stream. And the way that we get our resources is in large part increasing our attendance to make sure that we get every dollar available because students come to school. But the other piece of what we have to do is typically go to the voters and ask them to raise their taxes for us to be able to do critical work. Now, whether that's building a school building or building an addition or putting on a new roof or fixing some of these tiles in the ceiling, we have to go to our voters and ask for them to pay for a bond. And that's something we'll talk about later. But what I want to be clear about is that we have 2 different buckets of money. The first presentation by this lady right here, our CFO, our Chief Financial Officer, Nicole Conley-Abram, is about the money we use to operate schools every day. This means how we buy teachers, how we get supplies, how we're able to buy materials for our schools. The second piece, which is coming later from our facilities, is about the bond, and that's a different bucket of money. So I'm going to focus on the first bucket with our CFO for this part of the presentation. So the reason we need a permanent funding stream is that there's lots of things that we need to do, like staying competitive in the workplace, that requires that we actually compensate our teachers, make sure that we're able to get the best people in our schools, working with kids every day, and also that we're able to support the programs. And remember, I told you about the changing demographics. We need programs that serve those student populations. So if we didn't have any English language learners in the Austin Independent School District, we wouldn't need to fund programs around language learning. But we do, and the population is growing, and we want to be sure that we're serving the population of AISD. We have a lot of kids that qualify. They're super smart, and they can do lots of advanced academics. If we want to expand that kind of programming, we need the resources to do that. Now, because we have had budget reductions in the last few years, I want you to know that's not because we're not managing the budget well. The reason we have these kinds of challenges has to do with the lack of a funding stream coming into the district from the state. The federal government has cut their budgets, and we're not allowed, the Austin Independent School District by law is not allowed to keep every dollar and every penny that our taxes raise for us. Therefore, we are left short of available resources to be able to do our budget. But we run our budget in a tight, high-quality way. You should know that we have the second lowest overall property tax rate in the central area of Texas. We also have some of the highest ratings available from our financial agencies like Moody's and Standard & Poor's, which makes us, we're one of the few, like two handfuls of only several districts in the state of Texas actually have a AAA bond rating to be able to keep our interest rates for our bonds very low for our taxpayers in Austin. It saves us millions and millions of dollars every year. For 9 consecutive years, we have received the Superior Achievement rating from our Financial Integrity Rating System of Texas. And also, we've been recognized over the last 4 years from our state comptroller for having a good transparency in our budget, and we are considered a leader in the state of Texas in the way that we manage our budget work. And we also have some national recognitions as well. But what we are going to do tonight is present some of the budget materials to you, let you see some of the details in that, open it up for questions, and then also take all this information back to the school board on June 3rd, where they will have a work session to talk about the budget again. The board is not going to take action on a budget until the August board meeting date, because we want to finish this legislative session and see how that leaves our district as a whole before we finalize our budget going into the school year. So we will have probably started the school year before we get action on our budget, but we know that this is the most prudent and responsible path, even though it's not ideal. We will go ahead and prepare to fund our schools and take every step to trigger the resources so we start the school year, but finalizing the budget will have to wait until August. When I talk to you about doing more with less and that $60 million reduction, I just want to say that part of the challenge with the state that we're talking about in our funding formula piece is that that funding formula is over 20 years old and doesn't even account for inflation. Right? So when we say we need the state to really look at the funding formulas, we mean it. And everything that's in there right now really doesn't work to support Austin. The other piece that I just wanted to remind you of that's really essential for us is that in the state of Texas, because performance and accountability are extremely intense in this state, our standards and expectations set by the state rise every year. They never go backwards. And if anything, under the new STAR assessment and end of course exams, it's no longer about meeting a minimum for proficiency. This is about getting kids ready for college. And so there's a huge college readiness push in those standards. But the state doesn't give us money to meet those standards. They also don't give us additional money right now for any growth in our school system. So even if AISD continues to grow as a district, we don't get new resources to be able to serve those student populations. And I'll just make sure, and my last 2 bullet points here is, again, I just want to reemphasize that we're a business of people. We have a lot of people, support staff, bus drivers, cafeteria workers, custodians, teachers, librarians, counselors, principals, and a lot of other folks that have to come together to make a big system like this work. And staying competitive in the workplace in our central region area so that our salaries for teachers, which are not competitive right now, need to stay at least in the ballpark is a huge part of what we're going to be recommending to our board around compensation for our instructional and staff, along with other staff members in AISD. And finally, this is becoming more and more a world of choice. We have private schools, home schools, charter schools, and a lot of stuff in between. And if we want to stay competitive, the way that families often make their choices about schools is always about what is best for their children. And we want to provide them those options and stay competitive in AISD so that families are getting the kinds of services and programs they want and wish for and hope for the success of their child. And that's something we're trying to do also as part of this budget plan. I'm going to turn everything over now to Nicole Conley-Abram, our CFO, who is going to present to you the details in the budget. Thank you so much, and I'll be back to help manage some of the questions.
Good evening. Thank you. I'm Nicole Conley, CFO for the AISD, and it's certainly a pleasure to be here tonight to present the details of the preliminary budget for FY 2014. I've also deemed this as the nerdy portion of the presentation, so please try to stay awake. Many of the details that I present this evening can be found in our FY 2014 budget primer. Some of you have it in hard copy version tonight, but it is on our website as well. It provides great context and background for some of the complicated nuances of the state financing system and those issues that more closely affect Austin ISD, so I encourage you to access this information. Just to reiterate, the preliminary budget is the administration's initial proposal based on what we see, what we can read from the tea leaves today, accounting for those revenue changes that we expect as well as the expenditure changes. So there's plenty of time for you to give feedback and influence the process before the Board of Trustees actually takes action on the budget in the end of August. And I also want to take this time to recognize that we have one of our Board of Trustee members here, Ms. Ann Teich, so it's certainly being heard by the right people. So this meeting is just really held to engage you in the process, make you aware of sort of the details behind the budget, and show you sort of the iterative milestones as the school district builds its budget for next school year. We also have a lot of calculators, FAQs, historical facts. There's a bunch of data and information on the finance webpage that I encourage you to access that has some helpful information even beyond what's presented today in terms of budget and bond. So now the nerdy portion. And this sort of just demonstrates the kind of operating dollars, general fund operating dollars that we have. And you can see the decline in the most recent years. And that decline is expected to continue forward with the current proposal, with SB1 that was approved by legislators last year, which calls for even greater cuts in the out years if there are no change to the current laws that are in effect today in this legislative session. So you can see that we have less operating dollars to really absorb the costs, new costs, as well as our inflationary costs. And AISD, there are two ways school districts like Austin can generate revenue. Does anyone know those two ways? So she already told you that. Increasing our average daily attendance, which means not only do we have to enroll more kids, but they have to attend class every day, and then the tax rate. So we don't benefit from increasing revenues or property values that are going up. It goes back to the state under its redistribution formula. So unfortunately, the structural design of the school finance system expects us to absorb those inflationary costs every year, which can cost a district anywhere from $6 to $12 million on any given year. or ask taxpayers for an increase, which is very difficult and challenging to do, and it costs Austin taxpayers resources to do that. Moving forward, you can see, again, this translates into less dollars per pupil. When we account for inflation, just hard off the top, it's about a 2% decline from 2009 and 2011. This is the most recent data that's been available and audited from TEA. And so this translates into an effective reduction of about 5% in 2011 that we had to operate per pupil in the district, and it's got increasingly worse. This slide shows you that to no surprise, we've had substantial reductions in the amount of monies that we receive to support our costs, and from a revenue per water perspective from the state. This shows a reduction level of 8%. So at the time of our current budget, we're about 8% lower in terms of revenue and resources from the state as a result of those cuts that were implemented in the last legislative session. Nothing says doing more with less than a decline in our staffing. So you can see, and this chart demonstrates that we've had a sharp decline in about 11-12 of about 5% reduction in people in AISD. You can see a modest growth in the current year as a result of the availability, where we sort of realigned to maximize some non-local sources through grants that allowed us to bring back some of our staff. But you can see from FY11, when times were okay, we had a drop-off in staff. So we get a lot of questions about the impact of the legislative session, and the short answer is, I asked that this slide be taken out actually, is which way the wind is blowing. There are proposals being considered almost daily at the legislative level. At one point in time when we presented this slide last week, there was a House version that would have added $2.5 billion, which would have mean $2 million for the district. So today we have a potential Senate version of the budget bill that would translate into an impact of Austin anywhere of upwards to $11 million. And so anywhere from 2 to 11 million, but we don't know until all of that information, all of those proposals are vetted, and that probably won't conclude until August. At the same time, there's some other bills that are proposed about extending the amount of golden pennies. So all of this is very speculative. We have not made any assumptions on the revenue side in our preliminary budget, but we most certainly will make those revenue changes by the time we recommend the budget to the Board of Trustees in August. But just to say, the very minimum, things are very speculative. We will not see full restoration of cuts. I almost certainly can say that. We probably won't see a full restoration of our $60 million, while some districts across the state are probably going to see 100% restoration and receive even more dollars. And in some cases, some districts are getting up to 150% in restoration. Austin, because we're considered one of the property wealthy districts, although we don't feel very rich in Austin, unfortunately probably won't see that kind of relief. The impact of the school finance litigation, recently there were lawsuits that were filed on behalf of various entities asserting that the state financing system for public education was inequitable, inadequate, and had the effects of a statewide property tax. And that was essentially the ruling that was issued by Judge Deitch in February. We do expect it to be appealed by the state at some point in time when the rulings are finalized by Judge Deitch. But there's a lot of speculation as to how this might affect our budget in this session and subsequent years. With the actions, the proposals being considered to add more to public education now that are being considered by both the House and Senate, some question as to whether or not there's going to be a huge appetite or if the outcomes are going to be as favorable when it's appealed through the state courts at the appeal level. So we don't really know. What we do know is that the current proposals don't necessarily fit our requirements for adequacy. Certainly, we would like to see more restoration under the funding formula for those districts and see a true fix to the funding formula that recognizes current costs, updates the weights, and takes into account the cost of doing business and providing services for a more diverse and complex student population. Also, the property tax structure. Under law, districts can only tax up to $1.17. Again, the funding formula requires us to go to taxpayers to do small incremental increases to cover inflation. And for Austin ISD, because we're past the sort of golden penny range, we're required to hold a tax ratification election. So we're certainly hopeful that, and if we even went up to the full $1.17 authorized by law, we would never make up the cuts that were made to Austin. So we could, I think if we went up to the full 9 pennies, while it would yield probably close to $60 million in additional revenue, we would probably only be able to keep about $35 million of it as a result of the recapture system. So there's a lot looming out there that we just don't know about, and we don't know how this actual lawsuit may affect our books this year and the out years. So just to get into some of the details of the preliminary budget as it's being presented today, as I said, these revenue numbers will change without a doubt, but for the most part, our operating budget is comprised of the general fund, food service funds, which are sort of dollars that operate all of our food services functions, and our debt service. And that's our debt service payments on the principal and interest as it relates to our bond program, our existing bond program. And so it's just over $1 billion. The net change in the general fund, which is what you hear us talk about when we talk about financial pressures and deficits, it's pretty much the general fund. So the net change is about $39.2 million, and most of that change in the general fund, it can be attributed to expected higher costs for recapture. So again, because you guys' property values are going up, that means that we have to pay more under the recapture system. And so we expect that to go up to nearly a $24 million increase as a result of that. We also have built into the budget, assuming the continuation of a one-time salary increase that was implemented in the current year for all staff. So we're assuming those expenditures will be maintained, and there'll be a need to fund those for next year. On top of that, an additional 1.5% increase that will cost the district about $7 million as a one-time adjustment. Unfortunately, we are not in a position to make these adjustments permanent just because of because we don't have an offsetting revenue source at this time to support that recurring expenditure. We also have about $4.3 million set aside for healthcare increases, which is at this point in time a fairly reasonable proposal, considering the fact that we're on the cusp of some major changes as a result of the Federal Health Care Act, which will drive these costs up even further in the out years, and about $3.8 million associated with other required programming that are either mandatory, statutorily required, or are associated with our bond program, as well as board-approved annual academic and facility recommendations. So you see the biggest piece of this overall budget is our general fund, which is about 73%. And when you look at the big pie, the second biggest apportionment is recapture. So next year we'll probably pay $135.5 million to the state for recapture payments. Over the last 10 years, that culminates up to about $1.5 billion. We're the single biggest payer of recapture in the state of Texas. Unlike for our M&O collections, it is subject to the recapture, and again, that's just the redistribution formula that redistributes local tax collections for property wealthy districts to those more property poor districts across the state. The INS tax rate that we levy to support the debt service costs of our budget is not subject to recapture. So, so those are distinctive differences in the two tax rates that are assessed every year to support both operating and annual bond needs. The projected general fund expenditures, again, is the net sort of impact is about $15.5 million when you sort of net it all out. Again, it includes the salary increases and those items that I previously mentioned with regards to AFRs and the one-time 1.5% increase. The district, you can see that there's a shortfall. The district does not have enough recurring revenue to support recurring expenditure needs, and that's what you call a structural deficit. we're structurally imbalanced. We are making up this difference through the use of our reserves. Because of our prior year prudence and our ability to sort of save over time, we've built up our reserves that allows us to give us some time to sort of figure out both our solution, which will probably be a combination of both revenue and expenditure. So we're structurally balanced, but we have a structural issue because we have these recurring streams that need to be fully supported on an ongoing basis. You can see that Dr. Kerstarfin talked about we're a business of people, so most of our costs obviously are associated with our payroll, so we're nearly 87% of what we do goes to paying salaries. The other biggest component is associated with our contracts and services, and a lot of that we have to buy goods to support our the level of school-based operations for books and various kinds of supplies across the system. We have about 11,500 plus employees built into this budget. That's nearly $640 million associated with payroll alone. The $62 million for purchase services is just over 80% of our budget. Where does the money go? I mean, there's a lot of questions about how does the money support various operations of our enterprise, and we are a billion-dollar enterprise. So oftentimes people find it quite alarming the scope of the kind of services we buy, what we buy, from buses to boxes of cereals to books to pens. So most of our money obviously goes towards instruction, with representing about just over 63%. The next biggest category is for plant maintenance and security and data operations, and that supports our infrastructure costs associated with our buildings. And so those are the two big buckets of how we spend our dollars. Contrary to popular belief, general administration only represents about 2.5% of our budget. So you can wipe out central, pack up and go home, and it still won't necessarily have a significant effect on your budget in terms of reallocating cost. So the net revenue, again, to the district is expected to decline actually by $2 million when you sort of net everything out. We're projecting an increase in property tax collections, mainly because our chief appraiser has preliminarily suggested that we're going to see property values increase of about just over 3%, about 3.2%. Now, her estimate is always conservative. The first estimate, she will give all taxing jurisdictions preliminary values probably in April. I think we've got them this week. We need to build them into our assumptions. But by law, the chief appraiser doesn't certify the values until July 25th. And so we have to technically adopt a budget that utilizes the certified values provided by the chief appraiser. So we can't go out there and be aggressive about our revenue beyond what is certified by the appraiser. And so that's how we typically set our budget on the revenue side. On the federal revenue, just to speak to it, we're seeing an increase, and that's because we've implemented a system where we're going to assess some indirect costs on our food service funds, which will benefit our general fund budget. And it's we've been providing a float and subsidy to our food services for the cost of buildings, utilities. And since that fund is primarily supported with federal reimbursable revenue, we're instituting a system this year where we're going to actually charge the food service fund on the general side to provide some operating relief on the general fund. So again, on the local revenue, and I always say this pie is sort of not necessarily the case, but local revenue represents 84% of all the funds that we collect. State represents about 13%, but technically that's under entitlement. Really, primarily, all of our funds come from tax levy revenue, considering our recapture system. But under the entitlement formula, it represents about 13%. And the federal sources here are not our federal grants. Our federal grants are authorized in a separate process when final grant awards are made, because typically state and federal grants have specific deliverables associated with them, and they're considered supplemental. So your baseline costs are what they consider your investment. Typically, you can't supplant, so it's not incorporated in here because we don't have the flexibility to control the funds associated with that. So, and they have specific deliverables, which is why you don't see them as part of our general fund budget. We account for those in a special purpose budget. Dr. Christopherson already talked about that we have one of the second overall lowest tax rate of central ISDs. We probably have the lowest INS tax rate. And even with the proposed bond program, which we'll hear about later, we're still about about 3.5 cents. We still expect to remain in that position, and so we don't expect to move out of that position, considering the variance between us and the next guy today. And we know that we have a pretty well-managed debt program associated with our bonds. Just to give you some tax rate history, the tax rate that we have in existence today has not necessarily grown as substantially as folks would think, even despite the fact that your property bills may have gone up. So the tax rate is, quite frankly, from at the highest days back in 2006, we're 28% lower the overall tax rate for the M&O side. The overall tax rate, is about 24% lower than it was back in 2006 before property tax relief was sort of put into play. So the tax rate itself has not necessarily been increasing. Right now, we are in a position where we would have to go to voters to even increase our M&O tax rate. Voters were kind enough to authorize almost 4-cent increase in 2008, which would affect our fiscal year 2009 budget. As a result of the the recession and overall declines in property taxes, we didn't start increasing our tax rate on the debt side until about 2010. So that's when you sort of see the climb up, and it's to account for the debt service that was authorized by voters as part of the 2004 and 2008 bond. And when looking back at those bond propositions, when we look at the commitments that we made to voters with regards to the impact on the tax rate, we're still about almost two pennies under what that public commitment was. So we've been doing a pretty good job of sort of maintaining that tax rate in terms of how we layer and control our debt. So just a summary of the proposed budget increases. I've talked about these. $6.4 million off the top just to maintain continuity of services. Law requirements under Chapter 41, another $24 million. We have some other required mandatory needs as a result of some of the requirements that are being imposed at the state level for testing and ensuring passing for various coursework for our students and monitoring of testing programs. So we do have some increases that we have associated with as a result of those requirements. We have about 463,262 associated with some safety-related needs as a result of some of our increased need to have much more patrolling at our local campuses to guard against some of the unfortunate incidents that have been occurring in the last year, and even most recently, last few weeks. We've got monies that are supporting continuing programs that we put into effect at some of our campuses, like our IB strands at Anderson, and some of our programming associated with our leaders. But anyway, we've made these commitments to these programs, and there are incremental needs as more and more kids take advantage of those programs. And so we don't want to kill the program. We just want to address the future cost requirements. And these things are all listed on page 21 and 22 in detail in your budget primer, so I won't go through. So I don't know it off the top of my head, but you can certainly find it in your primer. And then about $2.5 million or so associated with those AFR and bond initiatives that are listed on those pages, so you can see the details behind those increases. Dr. Christopherson, she already talked to you about our human capital challenge. When we sort of look at ourselves compared to our regional and our state urban counterparts, our teacher salaries are low. We rank 8 out of 10 districts surveyed near us, and so we're competing in the same line of with our counterparts and trying to lure and attract the most qualified teachers in our classroom. We estimate that it would take us 5% for the next 3 years just to close that gap. And we recognize that that's a far-reaching goal that we would have under the current financial conditions that we're facing from the state. But is never far from our priorities in terms of addressing a need if we're going to keep the most qualified talent in our classrooms. Again, so we had a one-time pay increase last year. Employee salaries had been frozen for 2 years. They took on more, we cut out leave days. They took on more health care costs. We started charging them for increasing their rates for health care when we had never done that before. So clearly we needed to do something in the current year to address the growing needs, and the well is the widening gap. So the board took action to implement a 3% salary adjustment for all employees, and that's currently being supported in this budget proposal. But we're also recognizing the fact that costs are going up for health, and we need to stay competitive. And every time our surrounding districts inch up, we have to inch up. So while we are only setting aside 1.5%, it's a necessity in terms of trying to stay competitive within this region when teacher salaries are already low. So that's already built into the budget. I want to talk about dependency on reserves. Everyone asks how long can we go accessing our reserves to basically balance our budget. It's not a perennial solution. I talked to you about, the need to have recurring revenue that supports your ongoing expenses and needs. We have to protect our bond rating. If we ever experience a downgrade, not only will it affect taxpayers, right? You're going to have higher interest and borrowing costs because we're saving today because we are so highly rated. We could face a problem with being able to generate the capital funds and cash needed to support our bond program. And then it's just, people just think you're not practicing best practice financial standards, and it erodes trust and confidence from investors. And we have international investors. So it really is important for us to make sure that we have a good, strong reserve. That's the first thing all rating agencies look at. They want to make sure you have enough reserves on hand to account for operating costs, and the most highly rated districts in the country have in excess of 25 to 30% in reserves. I always say our counterpart, Round Rock, who is half our size, has nearly more than what we have in our reserves. So that says a lot about the need to plan for and have a substantial reserve in order to make sure that you've prudently planned for any unforeseen circumstances. Also, we need our reserves for cash flow purposes. When do most people pay their property taxes? As late as possible. That's December 31st. So that means we start our school year in August. So we need cash to operate August, September, October, November, December. So that's like 5 months of operating cash that we have to have on reserve just to pay our bills without any revenue, cash revenue into our system. Otherwise, we have to go out and pay banks expensive costs to borrow that cash. So we try to make sure that we have enough cash to pay our bills, and payroll costs me about $60 million a month in payroll costs. So you can just add up cumulatively not having cash on deck, and you're paying $60 million a month in just payroll, probably another $10 million in vendor pay. We have to pay the state. And you know what? We have to float the cash for our grants. Grants are most times reimbursable. So that means we have to outlay the expenditure and then ask for reimbursement. So there are a number of reasons why having a reserve and a cash flow is important for us, and it is a savings to taxpayers because we are not going out borrowing and paying higher costs to borrow because we have a prudent reserve on hand that we can access. So we try to, we fight like a tiger to protect our reserves, but that's the simple and short of it. You have to have enough to account for emergencies, and you have to have enough cash on hand. And that's why the rating agencies focus on your reserves so highly. So it's not a perennial solution, so we know that we have to not rely upon it for more than 2 to 3 years, and then we have to sort of come to grips with what kind of both expenditure and revenue adjustments that we're going to make to shore up our operating budget. And then lastly, this slide just points to some important milestones as we move through the process. I won't read them here, but we always have a budget hearing in August, and you can come and sort of provide feedback directly to the board on both the proposed budget as well as tax rates. Also, any of the board meetings that are scheduled between now and then, you're certainly welcome to do the same. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you so much.
So we're available to answer any questions regarding the budget, and then we'll transition to the bond.
Good evening. My name's Huddy Murray, longtime parent in AISD with children at many schools, and my last one graduating this year. I have a three-part question. All three answers should be really short. My understanding is that of money we get from the state, 45 cents out of every dollar is taken back through Robin Hood. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Then, part two, out of every dollar that goes to the state through Robin Hood, 11 cents comes from Austin ISD, or Austin proper. Is that correct? Out
Yes.
of every dollar that is Robin Hood money. And 20 cents of every dollar comes from Central Texas.
Yes.
Okay, so we are being punished for something. Who knows what it is? Three.
Well, can I just say something? I don't know if I always try to work in assuming good intent. I think when it all started, especially the people of Austin, I mean, I have to, I'm not from Texas, I'm not from Austin, but the generosity of this community, the legacy of generosity and support and embracing of all the other challenges the state might have. When this started was at least a decade ago, 20 years ago? Okay, so like 2 decades ago, the demographics were so different, right? And everybody was smaller, and also, I just have to say it, I think that Austin is its own special culture. I think we know that about Austin, and that people really felt like if they had the resources and this design was created, if they could share, if they could help other poor districts, that people were willing to do it. Our challenge is, you would think that 20 years ago, like I said, those funding formulas haven't changed, that people would have evolved each year and maybe started cutting back a little bit to keep it more balanced. But now it does feel like punishment. But just so that everybody who's been around for a really long time, who may or may not remember how awesome Austin was and still is, no one has ever said to me, don't do chapter 41. It is, can you balance it so that it feels more fair? And I still think even under this pressure, the people of Austin are so generous, they're willing to try to find a way to still help the state. But now that the demographics have changed and we are a majority poverty district with 65% of our kids living in poverty and the language needs and all the other challenges, it's not sustainable. So if there was some way to kind of fix this, we welcome it. But I just want people to know that it didn't start yesterday, and it was never meant to hurt Austin. I think everybody could go along with it because of the spirit of what it represented. And then over time, we've been left with the short end of the stick.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you, people of Austin, for the last 2 decades.
I would not disagree with you there, and I don't have a problem with sharing at all. But
I know.
It does
I know.
feel like an
It does
unfair
hurt today.
portion
It
of the
hurts
burden
today.
is on us. So I think you've answered my last part of my question is, do we realistically ever see this changing in the next couple decades?
Well, a couple of decades, hope springs eternal. This legislative session, no.
Okay.
So it's our reality right now. So that's what we're working with, and that is life. And we're trying to come up with a solution to the best of our ability. Oh, by the way, though, and while I want you to know, when I did I think was I the only urban superintendent that testified in the lawsuit, in our lawsuit that she mentioned before with Judge Dietz that ruled, that the funding formula was unconstitutional. For us, we did go on the record. Now, not everybody agrees with us. Remember, there are going to be people who are going to feel like they're going to get less if Austin gets a look back some of these Chapter 41 dollars. But we did go on the record in our testimony about these details, how much Austin was paying, that we were the #1 contributor, that it was now we're feeling a lot of the pain. And so that is in the record in the lawsuit. And while that's not what the lawsuit was about, we did take the opportunity to get that in front of the courts so that if there was anyone who was able, whether in the future or hopefully not 2 or 3 decades, but in the nearer future, they would have that to consider as they think about what this means for Austin and other districts that are on the high end of paying Chapter 41 dollars.
Thank you. My name is Kathy Painter. I'm a Anderson Murkison mom, and I'm incoming PTA president at Anderson High School. Just a quick clarification from the presentation you just made, Ms. Conley, on the slide that says the fiscal year 2014 preliminary budget includes no change in tax rate, and you may have mentioned it, and is that if the bond passes as well? Do you feel like that's going to change?
The 14 budget will not change, right? We've accounted for that. It will be the subsequent budget that will have incremental changes every year of up to a penny, depending upon the projections that we have. And so we'll manage that year to year. So you won't see a 3.5-cent increase in FY15, which would affect your tax year 2014. It will be incremental, a penny each year, the way that we layer our debt. And we layer our debt anywhere from 5 to 7 years. It's a smoothing process. And we use a commercial paper program that allows us to, as a tool that allows us to do that. So it will be a smoothing effect on the tax rate. We're thinking just a penny or maybe just over a penny for the 3 years as we bring these projects and these requirements online. It may not even go up that high, but that's a conservative estimate based upon our history in terms of what we pay in interest and expected cash flow needs.
I wish you would speak to the issue of affordability of Austin. A lot of people are retired. A lot of people are on government and private sector jobs that have not had inflation-based increases. Minimum wage has not gone up appropriately to keep up with inflation. An added tax burden to even homeowners, but to renters, to everybody. It looks like to me there's a prediction that we are going to have a tax increase to be able to pay for the bonds if the bonds do pass, and we support that idea. But can you address the affordability, the disparity of incomes in Austin, and the problem that having to increase the tax rate creates?
Right, so they're the two separate tax rates. So in a moment, you're going to hear about the bond, and you did different groups. But we know that, and Paul Turner, can you help me? I know for some groups, the homestead tax, if you're over what age? 65?
Yes. For taxpayers who have reached the age of 65, their tax is kept at the same level. It doesn't increase beyond that point. They would not be affected by increases. Ms. Conley mentioned the thing about going up about a penny a year on the INS rate, which is the thing that funds the bond. Another good thing about the INS rate is that it is not subject to recapture, so we're able to
Keep
benefit
100%.
from the entire amount rather than having some of it leave us there.
So that's one part, and fair enough. I mean, I hear you on the other piece. We work with for employees and for AISD. I mean, we've been incredibly sensitive to that, trying to hold back on any increases during the toughest economic times, and I know the country hasn't turned the corner either, but we are, as we said, in the most competitive region in the state, where everybody else has, quite frankly, far more money than us, and if we want to keep the best teachers, and we're trying to think about this in a far more futuristic mindset, that a quality education in Austin means a stronger financial base for the city. It means that we're able to have kids who are able to do the jobs that Austinites want to have here in the city. You'll have stronger property values. I mean, there's a lot of things about having a well-educated student population coming out of your public schools. And while, yes, I mentioned competition, we know that we are still the number one choice for families who have school-age kids, and that is a good thing. I mean, that is something that allows for our public to integrate, quite frankly. And everyone knows that the research on integrated communities where kids are going to school together, where we're more open and receptive to different cultures and people, means that we are stronger communities and our kids will be more competitive in the future in the global workplace. And while I know that sounds very visionary and that sounds like we're not talking about today and how much money would be applied to someone's pocketbook, as taxes increase. As in our district, there is today and there are many, many, many tomorrows. Kids still have to go to school. It's statutorily required. And we have such a great opportunity in Austin to do well and to keep up with such a beautiful city that's doing well for its state, that we have to do our part as a school system. Now, having said that, fair enough. You're right. In order for us to do this, we need those funding streams. And she described the two. Do you remember the other one? If it's not raising the tax rate, how's the other way we get money? Attendance. And I'm not sure if you followed this, sir, but we've been on the attendance campaign since I got here. It's been 4 years of nonstop attendance. And for what it's worth, we have done better. We have generated millions of dollars, additional dollars for the district by increasing our average daily attendance and also our weighted average daily attendance. But at the heart of it, I will say this. We know that if everybody came to school, because we have to hire for people anyway, if everybody came to school like they're supposed to, that would increase our overall budget by close to $50 million. So when you start thinking of that $40 million shortfall and how we could generate $50 million just by showing up every day, I got to say to the school communities of Austin, unless your kid is sick, right, come to school, go to class, do not skip, don't take vacations when you're not supposed to. We have a school calendar for a reason, and so much so, we've started making calendars a couple of years early so that there's no surprises about when the break is and when the break is not. So I can't teach them if they're not in school, and we do, as families and parents and caregivers. If you get them on the school bus, our commitment is we will keep them safe, we will get them there, we will hire you the best teachers and principals and counselors and bus drivers that our money can buy, and we will make sure that we get them to graduation. But if they don't come to school and study, that $50 million walks out the door. Now, we've made improvements, and I'm going to tip my hat to my high school people. For the first time in the history of the district, for the last 2 years, we've had a 90% or better attendance rate at our high school level. That's never happened before. And by the way, I love elementary. They come. Y'all come. You come and you come. Love Summit, too. This is such a great school. But I won't digress, but I will say, I know we could do so much to manage this shortfall if we came to school and attended regularly. And so that is something that we're going to continue to stay on top of, but it is money that we just let walk out the door, and I still have to hire like everybody's coming every day. We don't get to choose based on our attendance rates. We have to choose based on our staffing formula to be able to serve a particular school. So, but yes, if you're right, if we would have to seriously consider a tax rate increase for M&O, and we are going to hold off on that as long as possible, and we have been, but like she said, it's not a perennial solution to spend down the budget. We knew that under tough financial times, people were not going to be filling that, and that's why we built up the fund balance, and we're starting the big spend down. But that will not last long. And if it's not attendance, then we're going to have to start talking about that tax rate increase. And in the meantime, work on the next, hopefully less than 2 or 3 decades, how we can deal with recapture. I'll also put on the table that we pay Social Security. We're one of only, how many districts, Nicole? One of 13 that has to pay for all employees, and one in that pays something. And that's something that will take an act of Congress in Washington, D.C. for us to have to do, and that comes at a cost of $36 million every year.
I didn't mean to imply that I don't support all that the school district's doing to promote excellence, and especially paying the Social Security for employees. And I hope that the school district will be able to fight successfully the initiatives in the state legislature to cut back on the contribution to TRS, or the relative contribution of the state to TRS. There are some reforms going on that will, in effect, reduce the retirement benefits, the health insurance benefits for teachers at just the wrong time, when teachers that will stay in the career service as teachers, or educators at least, in different roles, needs all the more support, not less. So I applaud what AISD is able to do so far, but want to respect the challenge and hope that you can do more with the legislature, not on recapture only, but on everything else that they're doing.
Understand.
Thank you.
I'm Jonathan Polio. I have a student at Murchison. She will be going to private school next year because of the poor education available to Anderson. Which brings us to the first question.
Whoa! Anderson just got named one of the top schools in U.S. News and World Report, along with Bowie and Alasa, and I mean,
You don't send your
I know.
kids there.
Okay, so I mean, I just want to say there's another side to that story, but I will respectfully stop.
I would love
Go
to
ahead.
send my child to Anderson.
We'd
but
love to have her.
But
We'd love to.
unfortunately, it's not going to happen. But that's not what I want to ask you. We're talking
Okay.
about numbers,
Okay.
which is a lot more fun than disagreeing on this. First of all, one of the ways you get more money is you get, and I did see the USA polls, we've actually dropped in the last few years. But anyway, night school. Why
Okay,
not
then
more
I just have to say, because there's a lot, they're allowing more charter schools to participate in the study, and so there's
I know,
more
I know.
people.
I
Okay,
understand.
but we are gonna move on.
No, because it's also, let's not get into this.
Okay.
Why not more night classes to increase enrollment?
I'm sorry?
Enrollment is one of the ways you increase revenue. I'm going to go through numbers. I don't want to argue education
Yeah,
because it's
so,
silly.
but say your question one more time.
Why not night classes as a way to potentially increase enrollment?
We do evening, we call them twilight schools. We do whole schools that are twilight schools that allow students to come to school at night. It's particularly helpful for students who have
That's what I was
kind of, more challenged or unique family situations. So we do have that, and that's been going on since, we started that since I've been superintendent, and we've even had graduating students from it. So we do offer that as part of our programming.
Oh, cool.
And you're right, it not only helps increase enrollment, but it keeps kids from dropping out,
Yeah.
and it also helps with our graduation rate.
Well, I'll tip my hat to you for that. Next question. When I've lived in other cities, most magnet schools have the parents actually have to work or do some kind of pay to actually get their kids into school. They volunteer or they actually have to pay some money. I have not seen that in Austin. Am I mistaken, or is that not an idea to
Well,
have?
it's so well spread in Austin that we even have people who are challenging equity as it relates to raising private dollars for our schools. So we have so much love and commitment and engagement from some of our families that pull straight. Not only do they pay their taxes, but they pull straight from their pockets and put into schools. Ann Richards, you wore the T-shirt, so I can't help but like me. But Ann Richards is a perfect example of a school that even has a foundation. We have other schools that have that too, but they raise millions, and I mean millions of dollars to help provide programming that we otherwise would never be able to afford. And I've seen some of our school communities. I work very closely with ACPTA, that's our Austin Parent and Teacher Association, that they will even create partnerships with our Title I schools, that's schools where the neighborhoods are in high poverty, and they will give part of the money they raise to their sister and brother schools so that they have resources to be able to do things that maybe those families can't afford to do. And so I know depending on which side of the fence you are on that, for some people, they believe that's not a good thing. For others, they think that, this is what we should do. If we have extra resources, we should be able to give individually to schools. schools and programs. And as a superintendent, I'll just confess, I completely support it. I'm glad our families are supportive, and bless you 10 times over for sharing that wealth with other high-poverty schools. But it is in the millions of dollars. And,
So are you saying, I'm
and
sorry.
is,
So are
and
the
then we also
magnet
have-
schools self-sufficient?
Of course it's not. I mean, we're a $1 billion budget. It doesn't make us self-sufficient, but it's absolutely, it softens the pain. I mean, you have to talk to a teacher who can't get, is trying to do a new program in her class, or just trying to take kids on a field trip or a college visit. I mean, when people step up and support that, we don't have day-to-day money to be able to do those things, and it is a blessing to a school system. I've worked in lots of urban districts across the country. Austin, number one, both the chamber, I've never met a chamber that supports education, although I know it seems like sometimes people think they don't, that totally supports public education in their region. The second thing, that's all chambers, African American, Asian, the greater city Austin, and I've never seen parents step up like Austin parents to support our schools. So I think that we're an anomaly, and as far as volunteerism is concerned, we have to go so far. We're about to have a volunteer event hosted by Austin Partners in Education. We have so many volunteers in Austin that tutor, mentor, become second parents and caregivers to children, that it's so much that we track it, and when we apply for federal grants and things of that sort, it's actually of a value. That in-kind contribution can account for like a real in-kind but quantitative cost, benefit
It's
to
a
a school
revenue.
district. It's considered soft revenue.
Sorry. In other places, they have a requirement in the magnet schools for the certain number of hours of volunteer.
Yeah, there's been in some other places we've lived, there's actually a requirement if you want to send your kid to magnet school for that kind of thing. But no one's questioning Austin's generosity. We've already addressed that.
Well, I think our magnet parents do the same.
So there's a requirement?
No, I didn't say there's a requirement, but I'm saying that we've seen so much support, we don't see why we would require our parents in our magnet schools to show that support. We see it's evidenced in what they do already. I've never heard that before, but I will take a note of it and raise it with our magnet folks.
Okay, next question. I'm looking at this budget. Nothing worse than a number cruncher, looking at numbers. And 3.91% for student transportation? Why is that so high? That seems high to me. I mean, 28 million or almost 29 million. Can you explain that one?
I can explain parts of it.
Okay. I just see it looks high.
Well, one is, I mean, that is not high. I'm going to tell you, we are.
Okay, explain it then.
Again, you got to put it in perspective. If you're looking at raw numbers and you think $28 million, like I do, is a lot of money, it looks like a lot of money. When you look at it against what other systems pay and how their structures are, that is not a lot of money. We're actually very efficient in two operational things: transportation and food services. Our food services pay for themselves. I can't tell you how many, every district I've worked in, right? I mean, you too. Yeah. Everywhere I've worked, you end up having to provide subsidies for food service. Our food services are, now, okay, I have to say I've eaten a lot of middle schools, and, that's a lot of cafeteria food, but by and large, our people and our families and our kids eat our lunches, and it pays for itself. It actually makes a little bit of money. The other piece on transportation is we have requirements. I can't make special education students walk to school if they have special needs. We have to pay for that. Also, we have routes. I mean, our city provides for us dangerously, what is it called? Hazardous conditional routes that I cannot make children walk through. I can't ask them to cross Mopac without, as a second grader. I mean, there are a lot of things that we have to do, and we do limit it. And by law. I mean, this is the part, we have lots of legal things, and Austin is tight on the legal stuff, and we get lots of complaints from parents. I have to answer one at least a week where they want us to do more transportation to bring kids to school. We have a 2-mile minimum. You got to live outside of 2 miles to be able to consider taking a bus. And even our magnet families know we don't do door-to-door transportation. We make them do hubs. That's not popular either. But we try to reduce all that cost so we can put more money in the classroom. So if you had other comparisons, and we do compare ourselves to the other 66 large districts in the country called the Council of Great City Schools, Austin is a model for how we do that. And by the way, that guy who's behind the scheduling of all the routes is brilliant, and we have so much so that he's like our resident mapper of all things. And so they go back and they really try to make them efficient. We try to be fair, we want to be safe, and we absolutely have to honor the law. But when you do all that, our transportation is far less than what it could be in a city like Austin, where from head to tail, you could be in a bus for 3 hours in Austin traffic, right? And our people do it every day. They keep the stuff tight, and we run routes, and we try to be as efficient as possible.
So how would say it compared to, say, a Nashville, Tennessee, or a city of similar size?
I'd have to look at Nashville to have those numbers.
Give me an idea of what a typical transportation
Well, I
budget
mean, we
is.
were in D.C. D.C. was spending $62 million for a district
percentage
that
is
was
that?
half the size of Austin in a city that was only 10 square miles, right? So when I say you can get transportation that goes out of control, it is. And I'm sorry, and I want to make sure I get to other people.
Oh, okay,
Would
I'm
you
sorry.
like one more question?
I'll have one more question. I'm looking at your strengthening human capital, and you have the top 8 here, but I've also noticed there's a little footnote that says excluding Social Security tax. I personally value my Social Security benefit, and I'm sure all your teachers do. Where would Austin rank when you put Social Security benefits involved in the actual salary? I mean, it's a total package, which is what anybody gets paid on. I mean, an executive makes their money on stock options. So where would they rank with Social Security included versus all of these people? I don't think Round Rock has it.
Yeah, we do have that number. I've seen it before. Do you know it off the top of your head? I know it doesn't make us number 1. I know it still doesn't make us number 1, but it put us like in the top 3, if I remember. And we presented it to the board, if my trustee can remember.
Okay, I'm just interested.
But it is on the, it is on the board meeting. We do have it as a board meeting presentation, and we just did that in, was it February? So it's either the January or February work session for that month.
Can I just point out that it's pretty routine for teachers in other school districts to quit those jobs, come to Austin, work a couple years, and then retire so that they can get their Social Security benefits. So we're doing that all the time. I mean, regardless of what the other districts may be able to pull in for, you know, a lot of other, you know, benefits they have. When push comes to shove, they're coming here because we're the ones that have that benefit.
And to that point, if you go to like a new teacher orientation, that's where you really see it. Because most of the time, like in other districts I've been in, new teacher orientation, everybody's either first-year teacher or less than 3 years. In this area, it's kind of split. You don't get, there's not one group that really takes the biggest, well, I mean, there's going to be like a bit of a majority, but you'll see a significant number of teachers that are new to AISD, but might be a 25-year veteran. It has its pros and cons. Social Security is a double-edged sword depending on, I mean, our new coming teachers, our first and early year teachers, they're not feeling it. They want the money in their pocket. If you're at the other end of your career, it's a beautiful thing to have on the horizon. And then there's a lot of people in between. But the fact of the matter is, it's part of our reality and our budget for AISD. And like I said, it would take an act of Congress in Washington, D.C. to change that. And so we just put it in as a budget assumption that we have to manage every year. And for those who benefit from it, we're really happy for those folks. And for those who can't see perhaps the wisdom of what some folks were thinking back in the day as they set it up, or it may not be available, as Nicole said, as we go on. But we'll put it in that 30-year projection with the Chapter 41. Yes, sir.
My name is Biram Atashband. I'm a licensed professional engineer, and I appreciate AISD has given me lots of facilities type of work and all that stuff. But my question is on the education side. I volunteer my time at SCORE, which is Service Corps of Retired, well, Respected Engineers, I call it, but. And as that gentleman was saying, there is substantial amount of retired people in this city within the AISD district. For 17 years, I haven't noticed the school district allowing or something like that, creating an environment that all this business experience could come into your classrooms. I'm not saying as an employee or an educator or anything like that. For example, I got a call when I was at school. One of your economics teacher called us, and I picked up the phone on the other end. And it was, he wanted us to, or somebody to come over there and handle their project or something, assignment for. I think there's a wealth of knowledge from the retired community. Now, the city should take it, or you guys should take it, or something. I don't know how you do it, but that's a portion of the education. Make these students 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th and 12th. After all, I went through the 9th, 10th, 11th, right, in a different society. But there is some value to make them business-oriented, whoever wants to be a business-oriented. And I'm glad you mentioned the Twilight schools. I wasn't familiar with the Twilight school. Thank you for that.
Sure, and we agree. We want our retirees or anyone who has any extra time or interest on their hands. We actually have several thousand volunteers every year coming into AISD supporting the school district. And it is a mix of folks. We have, through the Austin Partners in Education, we have classroom coaches. We have relationships with our business partners and our community partners, like the city of Austin alone. I mean, they'll give up. Our community is so generous that even in our public service providers, they will allow staff to leave for an hour a day to come and tutor our students. I think the city tops about 200 of their employees do that every single week. And I know, like, I can think of one off the top of my head. It was IBM, who they even dedicate 3 days a week. Their engineers will come and work with our students to do what we call step-up high dosage level tutoring and supports. And we have thousands of people that support the Seedling Foundation, which is for students who have at least one parent who's incarcerated. I volunteer in that one, and so on and so forth. But we do encourage. We have a lot of retired teachers that come back. We have retired principals that will come back and serve when some of our principals have to go out on medical leave or something like that. It's just, the network has been incredibly supportive, and we can do more. I think I just read something in the New York Times that said that Austin now, I guess Florida's too hot, but Austin now is like one of the top retirement destination cities in the country. And so, you know, we have hundreds of people joining our community every week, and that makes us just even more poised and primed to be able to tap into those resources. So we agree, and I took that down as one of our notes to make sure that we continue to monitor that and reach out to people, even new people coming to Austin for retirement purposes every year. But for those we have worked with, they are awesome. They're great. And when they start, they'll follow kids through their entire life in AISD. So we're very blessed in that way. But thank you for mentioning that. It's a good thing to continue to work on. Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Duke. I am a parent of a second grader here in Summit. And I try to beat the traffic every morning and make her 2 years in a row perfect attendant. My question is about attendance.
Thank you.
Does AISD identify pocket of school that have low attendance and have action and plan to improve that?
Yes, thank you for asking that. We've gone so far, if you go to our website, we're doing real live public dashboards on many different data points about every school in the district, especially attendance. So if you go to our data dashboard, it looks like a CARS dashboard. You can go and pull down any of this. You can rank all the schools, see who's at the lowest, who's gone up, who's gone down, who's remained neutral at every level, and what their attendance rates are. And part of our strategy is that in getting that information out to the public, families will help us step up to the plate. But yes, every school has an improvement plan. Attendance is one of those elements, and we set targets for individual schools. So the district as a whole may only need to move up in the elementary area by 3 percentage points or 4 percentage points to be at 100%. But within elementary schools, there are some that are below average on where they need to be to stay competitive with attendance. So we go to each individual school and help those principals set those targets and then put in intervention plans to try to support them. And some of the things are actually, we're going to transition in a second, but even are in the bond. I mean, families will tell us, like, I could get my kid to school more, but we knew that the traffic is so congested in front of a school that perhaps, the streets have changed or new housing has been developed. And they'll say, like, my kid will be late if I don't get them there an extra hour in advance or something. I can't even get them to school, and I got to get to work. And I can't miss my job. So if I have to choose, I got to go to work, and I just can't get our kid in. Some of it is just logistics of how we get the flow of things moving better. And then some of it is, giving supports to families directly. Families will tell us, like, a kid will tell you, I don't have an alarm clock. I get myself up, but I don't even have an alarm clock. We'll go buy an alarm clock. We have people that are, we call them parent support specialists, and they are overworked, underpaid, and oh my goodness, and they're not enough of them. We had to cut back on that. But those parent support specialists, they know those targets in a school, and they will get on the phone and start calling. And some of our schools do home visits. We will send cars out to pick up kids. We know the kids have bad attendance, typically end up dropping out. So we have dropout prevention specialists as well that target those kids that are very vulnerable. But we have a lot of interventions in place, but we really need parents to say it's a value and just tell us how we can help you. If it's the alarm clock, that's something I can work on. I can help you. If it is, the bus route, it's very dangerous in my neighborhood and we have concerns about that dangerous walk, then tell us and we'll go back out and we send our people to go look at it and assess it. So if we need to move the bus stop, we move bus stops. So we just need to know what it is, and we need families to step up and tell us, and we will try to help. But yes, we have lots of intervention plans, and we target those schools, and we publicly post that information every month of every year. Okay, Paul Turner, our illustrious Executive Director for Facilities, is going to talk us through, and while we're making the transition, getting the PowerPoint up, can y'all just please give a round of applause to Summit Elementary School and our principal, Standish, who is so gracious. Stand up so people know who you are. It's really, really a lovely school. It's one of our, I love all of our schools. And this one is so incredibly special in your relationship with the community. I just want to say thank you, and thank you to your staff that made us feel so welcoming here tonight. You're just a lovely person, and it really shows in the school, so thank you. Oh, and then we have another lovely person, Paul Turner, who's going to inspire you with facts and information regarding the bond.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kerstarfin. It's my pleasure to be here at Summit. In a former life, I was the principal of Lanier, and we had many wonderful Summit students who attended at that time, and many families that we still know in the area. But my focus tonight is to talk about the upcoming bond election, which is going to occur on May 11th. Our role in this kind of election is to give you information, and that's what I'm here to do this evening. We do have the election scheduled on May 11th. Early voting is going to begin a week from this past Monday on April 29th, and it runs through May 7th. For every bond program, we have two committees. One of them is called the Citizens Advisory Committee. That group is made up of a geographically diverse cross-section of members of the community who provide different types of expertise, including parents, community leaders, people who have backgrounds in the fields that are most affected in bonds, such as architecture, construction, finance, law, and real estate. And so usually these committees are composed of a group of folks in the community that's kind of a mixture of parent representatives, community representatives, and people with expertise in those specific kinds of areas. This bond is divided into 4 separate propositions. I'm going to briefly touch on those and give you some examples in each one of them. The overview of all of them, the first one is health, environment, equipment, and technology, about $140.6 million in that one. Proposition 2 is focused on safety and security, relief from overcrowded schools. We have 3 new elementary schools in this one, and new construction related to that. The third proposition is for working on the renovation and replacement of building systems. This would be for things like heating and air conditioning systems that have reached the end of their lives, roofs that need to be fixed, electrical systems that need to be replaced, those kinds of things. And in our fourth proposition, there's a focus on academic initiatives, including our career and tech ed program, our fine arts program, athletics, and I'll touch on some of the specific examples as we look at each one. In the first proposition, we have some food service improvements. These are primarily campus improvements, such as adding walk-in refrigerators for the food, working on renovations to the serving areas or to the kitchens, upgrading electrical systems, and other related items, and that's spread across a variety of different schools across the district based on an assessment by our food service director in conjunction with our construction management department. In the maintenance facility and equipment area, that is primarily some additional equipment and construction to establish a satellite maintenance facility out at our new Southeast bus terminal that is going to be opening for the first time to provide service. We'll now have a bus terminal in the Southwest, the Southeast, and the Northeast. So we'll have a good triangulation that's going to help us cut down on what they call deadhead miles, where we're having to drive unnecessarily because we have to travel long distance from the terminals out to the route. So that's going to help in our fuel efficiency, and also having these maintenance people located at this site, it's going to cut down on the distances that they have to travel and so forth. Another area in this is transportation. This is to help implement a bus replacement schedule in order to not run buses beyond about 17 years of age. That is a pretty long age for a bus, and we like to put, and a dog too, according to Dr. Karstafen. I think she's probably right about that. This also helps us put fuel-efficient and low-emission buses, and each time the EPA changes their emission requirements, then we specify that in any buses that we purchase after that point. This is going to replace about 52 buses that are vintage late 90s, early 2000s. Believe it or not, some of them are getting to be up into that 10, 15-year age where we have put 200 or 250,000 miles on them, and it's time to retire them there. We also have technology in this proposition, and this is going to be looking at replacing student devices, about 20,000 of them, completing the rollout of our innovation stations to 3,800 more classrooms, doing network upgrades, refreshing laptops for 7,000 teachers, improving projection systems in classrooms, upgrading our instructional and assessment systems, including our student system and our grade book system that allows grades to be checked and so forth. We're working also on a number of other things like wireless and portables and some other kinds of things like this. Science labs is science lab equipment, primarily replacement of lab tables and fixtures, and the energy conservation effort is to replace emergency replacement of systems that failed during the period of the bond, and also a solar project that we're working with the city on, try to lock in our electric rates over a long period of time, and that is still in development, but we're very hopeful about being able to have that one completed. Safety and security. This, with all the tragic events that have occurred during this year, we have worked with our campuses to identify schools where we want to enhance the cameras that we have at front doors and systems to admit people from the office through a buzzer system, and we're adding that to about 77 campuses in this. This also works on our intrusion alarm systems. I remember the first, I've been around a year or two, and I remember when the first ones were put in, the day after they went into Dobie, where I was at that time, we had some youngsters leaving the band hall with a bunch of band equipment. So those things help keep us in operation, not losing time in instruction because someone's come in the night and taken off with things. So those are a couple of examples of the kinds of things that go into that. We're also looking at classroom additions at several schools that you see listed. These are the most overcrowded schools that we have in the district. Some of them, Cook, for example, has several classroom addition, and we're moving forward with additional capacity in those schools and the land to build them. We're doing some feasibility and design for the new South High School. Functional equity additions are additions that improve the cafeteria, gym, or library in schools to make the spaces larger. We also have a new theater that's going into the Ann Richards School, some renovations to improve or help the Lamar Fine Arts Academy that's gone in place. We're expanding the competition gym at Anderson High School because it was undersized for a 5A school. We're also adding a multi-purpose gym addition at Go Valley Elementary. Proposition 3 is facility systemic repairs. Again, this is a lot of the work that we're doing on building systems that I mentioned earlier. Part of what goes on in every bond is we reach out to every campus to get them to give us their ideas. There's $25 million to address individual campus requests that have come in. We also do library additions and expansions, and that's what the next item is. In career and tech ed programs, there's about $36 million for new programs to help position the district to be ready to participate in the UT Medical School, some additions at some of the high schools, renovations of existing programs, and so forth. Fine arts, the $25 million in that is to address overcrowded conditions in several of our larger schools. Physical ed, we're going to have practice field improvements, locker room improvements, and a number of other things to assist in that. We're doing some improvements in special ed programs at Rosedale and Clifton, where we'll be expanding classrooms for culinary at Clifton and building multi-sensory rooms and a library addition and some improvements to help students who are wheelchair-bound to be able to access all parts of the instructional program there at Rosedale. Also for the School for Young Men, we have a $20 million amount to renovate our existing building at the Ridgeview, which is the old Anderson High School campus, and that is in this bond in order to avoid the cost of having to spend more on either a construction or a renovation. Just in closing, a couple of bits of information about impact for a median valued home of $200,000 in the city. The increase would be approximately $70 a year, a little bit under $6 a month. And for the median business, which is approximately $500,000, $509,000, the increase would be about $178 a year. Election day, as we said, is May 11th. The early voting's April 29th through May 7th. We have here the election office, Travis County. You can find on their website the voting locations. You can ask us questions by going to www.austinisd.org/bond or by calling 414-BOND. You can leave us a message. You can go to the website and type us a message. You can call us. We will be glad to give you answers to any questions that we can possibly provide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. Do you have any questions regarding the bond?
Have they done any studies to see whether they could do like shifts in the schools instead of building more schools? Like-
And by shifts, what do you mean?
Like from 7 to 12?
Changing
and then-
grade level configurations.
And then some people go 12 to 5 or something.
Sure,
like
we've, I'm sorry?
Time.
Oh, time, clock time,
They did that
shifts.
when
I
my
see
s-
shifts, like a work
Yeah,
shift,
like
gotcha.
they did that when my sister was
Right.
in
Do you want to
school
talk about some of the, but that's how we're doing the twilight schools. Like we didn't build new places. We use our existing schools to then shift to another
But
round
that would
of-
be for people who couldn't go the regular, right? Or no?
Well, it would all be who couldn't go at the time that the regular school day
Okay.
is. So this is just another
Yeah.
way of saying
Well-
it. It happens to serve we try to promote it
Right.
for a particular population. But if we had overcrowding or there was some other issue
Right.
that we were trying to address, yes, we do other things. I mean, that is not as normal, I would say. We don't do that.
Right.
That's not a standing practice to do the shifts in time. But like I said, we are starting kind of move in that direction a little bit with the twilight schools, and that is open to anyone. We don't limit who can go. Some of the other things, that we've done in the past, although highly controversial, right? Changing boundaries is another thing that we do to try to relieve overcrowding. We've also done things like we've moved entire grade levels off of a campus or created a second site. So you'll see us with more pre-K centers where there's over-enrollment. We did that at 3 sites in North Central. You can step up closer. Don't stay so far away from the questions.
Okay.
We can share this. And then, but to your specific question, not as much here, no. But we do other things to try to relieve the overcrowding.
Could I be
Yeah,
the
go ahead.
historian for a minute? A few years
You look so young.
A few years ago, we actually looked at a year-round school model. This has been probably not just a few years, about 20 years ago. And it was not really something that the community was totally excited about. We were able to implement kind of a single track model in some of our schools where we wanted to provide additional enrichment and additional learning time, and that was successful. We did a number of things to work in with other community organizations to provide additional experiences for kids in schools where that might not normally be part of their life experience, and that was positive. But we never did a multi-track where we would be trying to stagger things in order to increase the overall capacity that we would have in the system, which was run pretty successfully out in California a few years ago.
The other question, with the stuff they're building, are they using local contractors?
Yes, we use and we go to bid, we have to bid, but yes, we use a lot of our local contractors, and if necessary, because people want their stuff built. I mean, we will also open up bids to we open up our bids to anyone, but still, we've hired people from the surrounding area, Houston, Dallas. We're an equal opportunity employer for bids, and we have to follow a bid process. But we do hire many people here from Austin.
We do monitor that, and the latest data that we have on that is we hire about between 85 and 100% of our contractors and architects and so forth are local, and that's kind of in a 5-county area that surrounds Austin. From time to time, though, as Dr. Karstafen said, particularly in times when there's a lot of construction going on in the community, we oftentimes reach out to some of the larger Texas cities to bring in additional capacity there.
Yes, I have a question about the new elementary schools. In 2008, we voted $27 million for land acquisition and construction of an undesignated elementary school. Has that school been built?
Yes.
Okay. And with respect to the high school that we in 2008 approved $32 million to buy the land, and the land hasn't been purchased yet, but in this bond, we have money for design, and I was wondering, shouldn't we have the land before we pay for the design?
You remember, the bond doesn't all happen at once. You start pulling on the tax dollar as you need it. So we don't need $892,243,000 right out of the box. We'll need portions of it. So we are not going to trigger anything for the next step of a potential South High School before we need it. So until we get the land, purchased and we're ready to do the next step, that's when we trigger it's not requesting, but what do you call it? Utilizing, our bond authority. So, we're not going to trigger it before we need it.
Just a quick question on the largest single element in the whole bond package was under Proposition 3, facility systemic repairs, yes, at $311 million. And could you expand on it? I mean, you didn't really comment on it very much. Could you just kind of give an overview of what is that $300 million goes to?
And while he's pulling up all the details, think big stuff like when we say systemic, like HVAC, electrical, give me something else. Roofs, plumbing. And he's got the whole list, and we have it detailed as well. But part of what we're doing, because this is when we first were circulating proposition language, that was one of the things that was not clear. We just said systemic repairs. So when you see the proposition language on the ballot, we actually have a parens, and we name several, or maybe even, I think it's like a dozen, individual things that we're talking about that mean systemic repairs, but it's those big buckets. And do you have others that you want to name?
It's a variety of different kinds of things. Probably the biggest things, the biggest systems are things, and the things that affect energy efficiency the most are the heating and air conditioning systems and the lighting systems. And that makes up about 75% of the impact. So there are those kinds of things. There's a lot of work on roofs,
Windows are another one.
replacing windows, replacing irrigation and drainage systems with these droughts. We're trying to put in more. Some of those systems have been in since their inception, and they're old systems where you have to walk from one coupler to another to hook the spout on it. And so we're trying to get in some systems that'll be more workable in this really hot climate. Electrical distribution panels, electrical systems, just in general that need to be replaced, safety railings around kitchens, interior door assemblies. There are just a variety of different kinds of things, but essentially it's to come in and replace systems that have worn out. We sometimes find roofing systems where the flashing starts coming up and it starts leaking into buildings. I was out at Murchison yesterday, and if you look at its roof from a distance, you can pretty much see through some parts of it, and that's going to be a big project over there. So certainly we can get into more detailed specifics, and I can walk you through a list of about 3,000 entries in that one if you're so inclined.
We might be. It's still early.
These repairs, on the surface, it sounds like maybe little things, but when you're talking about plumbing repairs, you're not talking about replacing a faucet. You're talking about entire systems that need to be repaired,
Right.
and
Like
roofing
the
systems,
sewer part of it.
structural
I mean,
systems.
when you start and you're pulling it all up, you've got to do the whole thing, you got to do it right, and this is any school, and one of the things that surprised me, but we don't, by the way, we're one of those districts that, from the state, in the state pool of who they can give some capital dollars to be able to do improvements, we don't qualify, so we don't get those dollars to do that kind of maintenance. So what happens, at least what I've observed as the superintendent,
But you're expected to meet code on some
well,
of these
exactly,
things.
and then so we have some budget in the M&O, in our operating budget. We have some to do those things, but when you start talking about a whole system in a school that's 70 years old, where it's never been done before, it's like any renovation project. You open the wall and you think you're fixing one leak, and then you realize that the entire thing has rotted out, or that there's a really significant problem, and then you have to replace the whole thing, and we don't get to Band-Aid and bubble gum. Once we open it and we've got to bring people in and look at it from a code perspective, it all has to be right. We don't get to take a shortcut. Yes, ma'am.
Mine was a similar question. I'm a McCallum parent, and I know there's like $20 million that's going to go to McCallum from the 4 bond issues. And I just wanted to say, when I first read about it, at the heavy rain we had recently, I went to McCallum, huge leak right there in the front hall. And so McCallum's about 60 years old, and I think it needs a lot of that money. You can clarify, is for that sort of thing, is infrastructure repair. There's some other things, but there's a lot that needs to be done.
One of the things I would say about that, we've put in a system here in that we were able to use in the needs assessment for this bond that was a very comprehensive review of the condition assessment of every facility in the district. And as a result of that, I think we generated a larger list of facility conditions this time. Not that we haven't worked on a lot of them in the past as well, but we think we really got a good set of data, probably the best that we've ever had, and I think that contributed to that. Another misunderstanding that I think has come about in some of this, there have been a few little small things that didn't seem like they fit into that area, but they are part of a larger project. I'll give you an example. One talked about trimming tree limbs off the roof, but what it What you didn't see necessarily unless you were looking for it was there was a big roof project. The tree limbs were digging into the roof, tearing up the roofing material. So we have to cut all that back to prepare for the project. That may be something that we can do through our maintenance department when we realize that it's going on. But if we get out there to do the project, we've got to do all that in order to make the whole project work. So if you hear that kind of thing, sometimes it's taken out of context and people aren't really understanding the holistic look at the whole project there.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
One thing that lots of parents have commented and questioned, come to me with are, if the bond passes, what now? And how involved can parents and teachers and administrators, how involved are they in the process of getting all this work done? Can you just comment, because I think it would be interesting for these parents to know of how how there is a committee that parents can participate on and be involved in the whole process of actually getting all this stuff done?
Absolutely. What we've always used, we are fond in Austin of being sure that everyone has a chance to participate. And what we have on campuses is our Campus Advisory Council, and oftentimes they serve also as our campus task force for bond programs. In some cases, they appoint subcommittees and what we do in that, we try to coordinate directly with campuses. There are often a lot of logistics that need to take place. We have project managers who are assigned to each campus, and their responsibility is to make sure that they're not out interrupting what's going on campus as far as instruction goes. And in order to do that, you need to coordinate the time that you're cutting the electricity off to put in a new electrical panel, or if you're doing a project that is going to run over a long period of time, you need to be sensitive to how that's going to affect the operation of the school. And the only way you're really going to know that is if you're working closely with the folks who are out in the school, the principal, the CAC, and the people who are making the decisions about how things are supposed to work. So it's essential that we have that kind of communication. We've sometimes used partnering consultants to assist in facilitating those kinds of discussions if need be. It's usually not necessary, but sometimes we get into some issues that are a little more challenging, and we'll sometimes do that. But normally it's just to make sure that we're staying in close touch and making sure that we're being sensitive to and mindful of and respectful of the things that are going on in schools, because really the most important thing that we do is teaching the children every day, and we never want to be something that's causing any kind of a interruption to that process.
The Texas legislature is in session right now, and I know they're talking about dipping into the rainy day fund possibly to restore some of the cuts in education. And I'm just wondering how, if you do get an infusion of money from the Texas legislature, how does that affect all of the bond money that we would be voting on prior to that happening?
The rainy day fund that they're referring to would assist our operating budget. The first part of the presentation, when we talked about the $40 million shortfall, we would use that to offset those dollars. And so there's the bond piece for INS, where you increase the tax rate as it relates to bond work, capital work, bricks and mortar. But what they're talking about, the legislature would give us relief on the operating piece, and the other taxing words that we use are called a tax ratification election, a TRE, and that's the one that money would help us get some relief on to reduce any future request to the Austin taxpayers. So we relieve the budget over here, the M&O one, not the bond, which is what we're talking about in this presentation. It would help us with the other presentation on our operating side, which is, I said, yes, it's already a minus $40-ish million.
My name's Tony Sheridan. I have a daughter here at Summit. And I'm not sure, I'm just going to throw this out, but as we saw the economy decline and we had all these budget issues, one of the things that happened was to compensate for the loss of teachers, we increased the ratio of students to teachers in the classroom. And I believe this is it's had a bit of a detrimental effect. I mean, the teachers are having to spend a lot more time, or maybe you had 1 or 2 students that were disruptive or needed a little extra attention. Now maybe you have 3 or 4, and it affects the education of all the kids. So in any of this, are we going to address that? Are we, as things improve or as we get more bond money, are we going to try to get that ratio back to where our teachers are more effective and they can focus on the students more?
The bond does not help, like I said, the other side, the M&O side. What it can do, the bond can help with improving working conditions. There's nothing like working in a classroom in the Texas heat at 100+ degrees and no air conditioning or spotty air conditioning. Or there's nothing like having to move your classroom for 2 weeks at a time to go work in the library, or not have a library because the roofs have leaked and you can't get, the books are ruined. I mean, this is more the support. We always say bonds, plans, facility master plans, technology plans, all those things support the bigger academic piece around what we're doing for staff and students and families. But as far as class size is concerned, in Texas, which is, each state is really different. I've worked in different states. In Texas, the statute sets the limit for how many students can be in a classroom. In our legislature here in Texas, they've even passed laws that says every elementary school has to have a counselor. We don't get a choice. We have to just go pay for it, even if you don't have the money. So there's a lot of things in statute that guide our class sizes, and by law, we are required to honor those. And in certain cases or extreme cases, we will ask for a waiver, but we work that out with the school for very specific reasons. But if you see any increases in class sizes, which are set at a level that, compared to most states, is considered, lower than what I've seen in other settings, we don't exceed that. We work to not exceed it. And if we get to that point and it tips, then we have to hire another teacher, and we have to draw down in the fund balance if we have to do it. But that's by law, and we do honor the law. And when it's extreme and necessary, we will ask for a waiver, but that is not a common practice in AISD. So, but we have seen some increases in class size, and that won't be relieved unless we really get more money in the M&O piece. And I know that's not a popular answer, but it is the truth of our circumstances. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I just heard that you said a citizen group or a volunteer group is going to be prioritizing your spending. Why are you not leading this? You're abdicating your responsibility and putting it on. So what I see...
Wait, what just happened? What question?
This business of... How are we going to divvy out? No, how are you going to, come on.
I'm not sure what you're
What
asking.
I'm saying, it was reference to how are we going to be spending this money? If they should pass, how are we going to be spending the money on the bonds? And you said the CACs. We're back to the bond, that's why we're here, okay? So you...
I thought what we were talking about on that was coordinating with campuses if the bond passed.
I hear that.
Okay.
So, but what I see is in 4 years, Murchison's roof is still going to be leaking. You all need to set priorities on the emergency stuff, the big stuff. And that's what I don't like about this. There's a lot of stuff that is going to cause huge damage later on if you don't fix it. Those should be priority. You should be fixing the roof first and foremost. Athletic tracks are nice. I run on Austin Highs every Monday morning. It ain't that bad. It can last for another bond election. So I just don't see where you all are prioritizing the use of my money that you're asking for. And I think that we need to be looking at health and safety issues first and foremost. So yeah, I'd like the roof to be fixed. And I want that to be fixed first before you even think about doing an athletic track, a locker room, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not seeing that in any of this discussion.
Yes, ma'am. Well, can I speak to that for just a second? We're actually in the process right now of working on, and of course we're not being presumptuous, but we are starting to think about what kind of implementation plan that we need to put together. And the things that we would look at doing first during this next summer are the most critical emergency kinds of things that would cause future damage. And that is exactly, and I appreciate you pointing that out, the kind of thing that we need to give attention to. In fact, we've talked about doing, usually we organize around school projects, but we also will sometimes come in like with roofing projects and put a group of them together and do them, and we've done that in several of the bonds, where we'll go out in that first summer, you know, hire designers and roofers and get started on that immediately. We've got several roofing projects that we've already approved out of contingency. Keeling and Pierce are two that we're looking at right now. But certainly the point that you're making is well made, and I'm going to take that back and reinforce with our guys who are working on that plan right now to really look carefully so that we're not having any kind of collateral damage that's resulting in some of these projects where we know we've already got an issue.
My name is Karen Moore. I'm the CAC parent co-chair at Lemoore Middle School and Fine Arts Academy. And we've been very happy with all the input that y'all provided over the past couple of months with the faculty and the parents, so we can get what's needed at our school. I know at our school we're very, very excited about the HVAC work and the expansion to make more room for the Fine Arts Academy growth. But we've been educating our feeder schools about the program, and I've been reading a lot about it, and I was wondering if you could expand on the solar panel program that you talked about just a little bit, or the solar part that you spoke a little bit about.
We do have some dollars that are set aside in this, and there are kind of two programs or two options that we're looking at right now. One of them would be a kind of an innovative approach where we would be working with Austin Energy and the city to see if we could build a kind of large solar array, similar, not as big, but similar to the one that the city built out at Weberville, in order to generate a large amount of electricity that could be put back into the grid. We think it would be kind of a partnership with some what they call solar integrators, firms that come in and actually help develop, put in place the solar panels and so forth. There are some challenges with that. We'll need to work closely with not only Austin Energy, but our board and the city council to see if we can make that work. We have to be able to be in alignment with the rebate programs that the city of Austin has in order to make it a cost-effective option. We also get in-kind donation of a lot of the panels from the solar integrator because they receive like a 30% tax credit in that model. So, but there are some regulatory and issues around the distribution system that, of course, is owned by Austin Energy that have to be worked out, and all of that is still it's being worked on as we speak and is not solid. The second plan would be to continue the work that we did, starting with a stimulus grant that we got to put in. It was about $1 million stimulus grant that allowed us to install solar panels at 4 of our schools, 2 high schools and 2 elementaries. You know, a $10 million amount would allow us to extend that to a number of other schools in the district, which helps reinforce our commitment to renewable energy and sustainability, all the things that the board has adopted, both a resolution and a policy that codify their commitment to those areas. Dr. Kirstharfen has been a very supportive leader in making sure that as we keep pushing forward in that, that we're continuing to work toward a model program that we can be proud of, not only in the Austin community, but nationally. So we have a couple of options in that. We're not going to jump forward with one or the other. We think that we can lock in our electric rates over a 20 to 25 year period with that first option if we can make it work. We're not positive we can yet, but that's where we're headed, and that's our #1 hope. And if that one doesn't work, then we'll keep expanding our solar presence around the city. We do have an issue in that where we have to do kind of an assessment of each roof to see whether the sun strikes it at the right angle, and if we have too many trees that shade it and that kind of thing. So we'll have to make some decisions about schools that are well-suited and others that may not be, but that's kind of the plan on the energy, the solar energy area there.
Thank you so much for your time. It's a little after 8 o'clock, and we promise to start on time and end on time, and we want to really respect your evening. But thank you, and you can submit more questions to the district, and go to visit us on the website, and you can call for more information at 414-BOND. Have a great evening, and thank you for your time and your patience.